Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2017 action sequel, John Wick Chapter 2. Now, this is how you make a bigger, badder sequel and do it the right way. I really enjoyed this film when I saw it in the theater in 2017, and it still holds up remarkably well to this day. It's a really exciting, thrilling, fun sequel that widens the size and the scope of the franchise and does it in a way that feels natural and also in a way that's very respectful to the characters and to the spirit of the franchise as a whole. Now, one of the main reasons why I think the sequel is as successful as it is because of the continuity. And the continuity that I'm talking about is the fact that the studio brought back Chad Stahelski to direct. Derek Kolstad was retained as the film's writer. So you had a lot of familiarity behind the scenes. So you didn't have a lot of instances where, oh, you have some new guy coming in trying to fill the shoes of those who came before him. You don't have that extra added pressure that other filmmakers would have if they had to try to come to the same level as Chad, or in some way, somehow, against the odds, top what he did with the first film. So that enabled the sequel to not have as much pressure behind it. And it also allowed things to flow better in terms of the narrative, in terms of how much easier things were able to rise and fall and explode in terms of new entries into the franchise, in terms of storylines and characters and settings. The continuity is huge. It's a very big deal, if you ask me, for films like this and or franchises that are just starting off to have that continuity. And I think in a lot of ways this film and the other film in the franchise, Chapter 3, really do benefit from that continuity. And Chad Stahelski, he already showed that he was a talented director in the first film, but with this one, he really flexes his directing muscles. He really just knocks it out of the park with so many sequences that are very hard to pull off. He was audacious when it comes to his attempts at filmmaking in the first film, but in the second movie, he turns that audacity to 11 with just really stunning and masterful sequences of action and carnage. The opening scene with John Wick heading over to this Russian chop shop to get his car back, the wide shots of John Wick just kicking ass and taking names, the sequence in the catacombs later on is one of the best action sequences in this entire franchise, and honestly one of the best action scenes of this decade when it comes to the time period that this film was released in. It really is that fucking good. And then you have the finale, the climax that takes place in a really difficult place to shoot in the Reflections of the Soul exhibit at the museum. That's an incredible undertaking for any director to take on, let alone someone like Chad, who had a few films under his belt but was just kind of starting out. For him to really tackle something like that early on in his directing career, and not only pull it off, but pull it off brilliantly, is something that really does deserve a lot more praise. Because that sequence alone, because of the lighting, because of the use of mirrors, because of the glass, because of everything involved with it, was a massive undertaking for even a veteran director to make look as good as Chad did in this film, as well as his cinematographer. I mean, he probably didn't do it by himself. His director of photography also was along for the ride, and in a lot of ways was a second conductor when it comes to the masterpiece, the masterwork, the symphony of action that took place in the finale. Um, but yeah, Chad Stahelski, I just feel that this film really cemented him as a up and coming big new director in the action genre. And not only just the action genre, but director period. I think he could probably pull off all kinds of genres because he's that good. He's that talented when it comes to directing. And not only is he really talented when it comes to directing action sequences in terms of providing them with the right punch to them if it comes to a fight scene, or the right amount of power to them when it comes to a shootout or a firefight. For instance, you have direction in the film where a lot of really powerful emotions also need to be put on display. And you have also a lot of characters here that have their own unique intensities about them that need to be brought to the forefront and brought to the screen. And I feel that Chad really brings out the best in his cast to really make them pop just as much as his visual style. Keanu's never looked better than he has in these films, thanks to Chad. Keanu, he's given James Bond a run for his money in these movies because of how Chad shoots him. And other actors and actresses are also getting the same rub. So Chad is just a really great director, and it's really a treat to see him work his magic in this film. And it's just one of those films where it absolutely is epic in terms of its size and its scope. And on top of that, there's just some really great looking shots. And I just love that scene in the Reflections of the Soul exhibit. I love that so fucking much. I loved it when I saw it in the theater because it was unlike anything I'd seen before. And I loved watching it again on home video because it's just a really beautiful sequence. It's so gorgeous to look at. And with the screenplay, Derek Kolstad not only provides familiarity of the characters, but he also widens the scope and ups the stakes in a way that, for the most part, is really satisfying. I like the connection to the first film with John Wick in the beginning of the sequel trying to get his car back. I like that. It's a nice way to start off the new chapter in the franchise. And I really like the fact that John Wick is no longer stuck in New York City. It's not the same kind of film. I love the fact that chapter 2 is going big. It's going grand and going outside of the norm and having John Wick leave the country and go somewhere else and really bring his skills overseas. And I think that's a really nice touch. And On top of that, I like the other additions to the overall franchise with the Bowery and that whole underground. I really love that. I think that's really fun and unique and different. I like the extra added mythos of the Continental and this whole shadowy group that's responsible for these assassins, the High Table. I really like a lot of that. I love the addition of the marker. I think it provides a nice conflict for the film and a really concrete reason why John has to once again go back to the life that he tried so hard to get away from. And I also love the snarky sense of humor. I love the scene where John Wick, he's going to this armory and it's written in a way as if he's at a wine tasting. I love it. It's clever, it's witty, it's hilarious. I love that scene so much. It's great. And it's a lot of fun. And there are a lot of other moments like that where it really does have a nice, snarky sense of humor. And it lightens the mood and makes things not feel too heavy. But then it's also not just fun and games because the action sequences are brutal. They are just really crazy, insane, and violent. Violent with a capital V, but in the way that is creative and really enjoyable to watch. And it also is not afraid to go places that other films might stray away from. For instance, when it comes to one of the film's characters, she winds up killing herself. And I thought that was a surprising touch, not something that I expected to see. And it was handled in a way that was darkly beautiful in terms of the visuals, but also very tasteful, despite the fact that it's a suicide scene. I really like the fact that there was a heart to it, and you had that moment where John is holding her hand while she's dying. That was something that was really nice to see. It provided more of a soul to the film and also continued to provide more of a soul to John to show you that despite everything that he's done after all these years, he isn't a soulless killing machine. He still has a heart and he still cares. And that was a nice touch. That being said, this screenplay does have some issues. I don't really think the villains, the way that they're written, is that effective. I don't like D'Antonio. I think Santino is about as unlikable as Santino Marella from WWE, but he's not a engaging villain. You don't give a shit about this guy. It doesn't help either that the actor is not delivering really the best performance. And on top of that, his right hand woman in Ares, played by Ruby Rose, who she's just an absolute joke. No offense to Ruby Rose, but in this film, she has no physical presence, and the fact that she's mute is a one note thing that is interesting for a few scenes, but after a while it loses steam. And then on top of that, when she finally fights John Wick, it's pathetic because she's no match at all for him, and she predictably gets her ass handed to her in 30 seconds. That's at least what it felt like. She did not really put a dent in John at all. I don't even know if she trimmed a single beard hair off his face. So it's one of those things where the film spends all of its time trying to build her up as some kind of big deal, and then when the time comes for her to assert herself, she's a limp, wet noodle. So I don't really care for the way that Ares is written. I don't care for the way that Santino is written. Honestly, I think Derek should have had Common, his character of Cassian, who is the bodyguard of Gianna, who's the one that ultimately killed herself. I think that Cassian should have been hired by Santino after that, and he should have been the one to fight John Wick in the climactic final fight in the exhibit at the museum. I really think that would have been much more satisfying, much more badass, and you could have that whole fight that they had in the subway, and you have it in the Reflections of the Soul in the mirror room. And Common's a much stronger villain. He has a real tie to John because John killed his mentor and his guide. So it's one of those things where I do feel that that was a missed opportunity. He should have been the main henchman instead of Ruby Rose, because Ruby Rose was nothing. She might as well just been a bit of tissue paper for John Wick to tear through. Like it's nothing. And I don't like the fact that at times the sequel does suffer from sequelitis, where the screenplay throws in a lot of references to the first movie with lines of dialogue like, oh, remember this moment, remember this line, remember this. And I'm like, yeah, I do. We don't really need to do that. That being said, it doesn't do it as much as other sequels, and it doesn't do it to the extent in terms of how it's handled as badly as other sequels do. So it doesn't affect the film a lot in the long run, but it's still something that I noticed. I think there were some good callbacks though. The opening where John Wick is going after his car that was stolen in the first movie, and also the pencil scene. I mean, you heard all about it. John Wick killing three people with a pencil. And there's a moment in this movie where John Wick actually does use the pencil, and it's fucking awesome. It's awesomely badass and gory and just crazy. And that's one callback that I think was well deserved and was nice to see. The other ones I could do without because I thought they were a little cornball, a little corny. Um, and there are some moments where things get a little muddled in terms of the not necessarily the narrative as a whole, but kind of when it comes to the time, how time plays out throughout the film. I think that isn't necessarily an issue with the writing. I think it's more of a problem with the editing because there are some moments where it's a little confusing. I don't really like the way it's edited at times. There are some moments in the film, like for instance, the sequence where John Wick, he's he has a bounty on his head now that Santino's put out there, and so all these assassins in New York are hunting and going after him, and there are all these scenes where he's fighting these different assassins while I believe he's trying to get back to the Continental Hotel. And I don't like how those scenes are edited together. It's a confusing mishmash, and at times it's really difficult to follow the continuity of those scenes. because you feel like, okay, this scene is happening now, but it's actually happening later. You know, that kind of thing. And it kind of affects the flow of those scenes a little too much for my tastes. So that's one instance where being audacious comes back to kind of bite the film. But overall, it's fairly consistent when it comes to how effective it tells its story, how it expands upon the franchise and widens the scope. And even though the ending, Santino's death is really not much to write home about, it's very quick and they're really not very satisfying. He just walks into the Continental and shoots him. And I think the reason why it was set up that way is they cast an actor once again who was not much of a physical threat to Keanu Reeves and he didn't know how to fight. So, in order to not run into the same situation as they kind of did in the first movie, I think they just decided, okay, we're going to get around this by having John break a cardinal rule and shoot him while he's staying in the Continental. And all right, I get it, but it just leads to not really that memorable of a finale. And it's a little bit of a letdown considering the film spent all of his time with John talking about he's going to kill him, he's going to do this and that. And he does kill him, but it's just one of those, just pops him in the head, and that's it. It does lead up to the really great cliffhanger. One of the best cliffhangers I can think of for a sequel that really gets you hyped for the next film, where John is now excommunicado and he's got an hour to try to stay ahead of all the assassins that are going to be gunning for him. I think that's just a really brilliant idea for a cliffhanger. And it's definitely one of my favorite cliffhangers that I've seen in a sequel. And also one of the best when it comes to the execution. But yeah, like I said, there are some issues with the screenplay, but for the most part, I think it works really well with the characters. It's nice to see more scenes with Winston and the concierge. Uh, I'm trying to remember what the actor's name is. Oh yeah, Sharon, who's played by Lance Reddick. That's the actor. I got the two mixed up there, the actor and the character. But speaking of actors, might as well talk about the cast. I mean, for the most part, it's a good, sturdy cast. Keanu Reeves is, I mean, he is just terrific as John Wick. This is a role that he was born to play. He once again took full commitment to another level with this role. He spent 3 months training for this movie with gunplay and fighting and driving. He did 95% of his own stunts, and it really does show in this film. I'm not saying that Keanu was bad in the first film. He wasn't. He was really good, but you could see that his skills were even more honed and even more refined in this sequel, with how even more fluid his movements were when it comes to the fight scenes or when it comes to the gunplay sequences, like the spectacular sequence in the catacombs and the scenes in the Reflections of the Soul. But yeah, Keanu is just, he provides that sharpness and that edge that is just so believable, so real. And the fact that Keanu himself is such a genuinely nice man and a good person, he brings that to the table with John Wick as well. So it makes this character so likable and one that you want to root for, one that you want to run through a wall for. And the other additions to the cast are nice. Common, I think he did a really good job as Cassian. I wish that he was the main secondary foe for John in the climax instead of Ruby Rose. Laurence Fishburne reuniting with Keanu as the Bowery King, really inspired bit of casting. They still have great chemistry, and Laurence Fishburne has a lot to work with here, and really enjoyed seeing him again, and in a role that wasn't a throwaway role either, like in other films that he's done as of late. Riccardo Scamarcio, yeah, he's one of the weakest links of the movie, and he's the main bad guy. This guy was Italian Zac Efron. Zac Efron's Italian brother. And he had all the charisma and acting ability of a paper cutout of a Italian underwear model. It's just one of those things where the guy just didn't have it. And I don't understand why he was cast. Why was this guy cast as the main villain? He doesn't have the presence that's needed to really go toe to toe with Keanu Reeves and his larger than life persona. And every scene that he's in with Keanu, he just gets blown off the screen. Any scene that he's in with other actors, he's blown off the screen. If you compare him to Peter Stomare, who was in this as Abram Tarasov, Vigo's brother in the beginning, he gets annihilated. You compare him to Ian McShane as Winston, or Franco Nero as Julius, the owner and manager of the Continental Hotel in Rome, or John Leguizamo. Like, there's so many actors out there that you probably could have brought to this role. I mean, at this point, even fucking Zac Efron would probably do a better job and be a more intimidating presence than his Italian brother in Riccardo Scamarcio. Scam is right, because he's a scam. He's a total scam of an actor, because he just does not have it. And Ruby Rose, I guess the biggest plus is that she doesn't say anything, and I'm not saying that because I have something personally against her. I'm saying that because she's not a very good actress. I've seen her in a lot of things. I've seen her in clips from Batwoman, which was a disaster. I've seen her in trailers for films like The Doorman. She does not have the acting chops to really be a big lead or even that big of a deal. And I think the main reason why people remembered her is because of the fact that her character was mute. And that was something we didn't see very often. But if she wasn't mute, I don't think anybody would remember this character at all. And for good reason, because Ruby Rose sucks. Nothing against her personally. She's probably a nice gal, but I think she's not a very good actress. And when it comes to an action film, she just does not have what it takes. She does not have the right intensity, and she doesn't make you believe that she's a badass. And it doesn't help either that the screenplay provides her with nothing badass to do other than saying, I'll be seeing you. And the rest of the cast, I mean, Lance Reddick is back as Charon. Really like him, and I really like the dynamic that he has with Keanu and Ian McShane. John Leguizamo's only in it for a little bit, but once again, the one scene that he's in, he's really good. I wish he was used more, to be honest. And I mentioned Peter Stomare as Abram. I mean, you could just have Peter Stomare as the main bad guy. I actually would have been okay with that because he's a good actor. He's already shown in other films that he can pull off the main villain role. Or Franco Nero. And I also want to mention Claudia Gerini as Gianna D'Antonio. I thought she was quite good too in her little brief role. Um, and Peter Serafinowicz, I probably pronounced his name wrong, but the sommelier, the weapons supplier at the Hotel Continental. I wanted to mention him because he was just so hilarious and really uh, a treat. He was a treat to watch because he was just so good with his comedic timing. And the film is also noteworthy on other levels. The score by Tyler Bates. I already liked the main theme for John Wick, and I also love the fact that the theme is brought back with the sequel. And it's also enhanced and made a little bit better. Uh, and I really like the John Wick Reckoning bit of music from this score. It just takes an already really good piece of music and just makes it even more powerful and makes it a stronger score. And the original music that's heard here isn't nearly as good as the original songs that were in the first movie. That's one thing I forgot to mention about the first film. Uh, the original songs like "Think" by Kylita, but the pieces that are here are fine enough, but they're not nearly as good. I gotta be honest. The cinematography by Dan Lawson is brilliant, just gorgeous. A lot of different shots here are just really terrific and lovely to look at. And it's well edited by Evan Schiff. It's a little long. It's definitely longer than the first film, but it doesn't really feel too bloated though. It still has a really good pace to it. And there are a lot of sequences in terms of the action that are very long. They're not short. They are really grand and big in their scale. And as a result, they are just absolutely badass and something that the action genre at the time was really missing. These kind of long, wide shot action scenes that are allowed to have time to breathe and to really provide the utmost impact. And it's one of those films where I don't even know if it's necessarily better than the first, but it's on the same level. And that rarely happens with sequels, where you have a sequel that is on the same level and is on the same footing as the first movie. Um, yeah, I think John Wick Chapter 2 is a terrific sequel, and I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. And if it's been a while since you've seen it, I recommend giving another watch. Uh, it's definitely got a lot of moments that'll blow you away and get your adrenaline pumping and make you want to cheer because of just how fucking sick and badass uh, so many of the action sequences are. Anyway, thank you for watching my review of John Wick Chapter 2, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.